Peterson Wachira is the man who's asking whether the government can be lent some money by I&M Bank. He is the national chairman of the Kenya Union of Clinical Officers. Good morning, Peterson.
Good morning.
Peterson, you just walked in and we invited you here so we can talk about what the unions are complaining about, yours being one of them, which is the content of the finance bill.
Yes.
With particular focus to the housing fund. What is the position of the Kenya Union of Clinical Officers on this?
Yeah. Thank you. And it's always good being here. Let me say that not only as clinical officers, as all the workers, all the public workers, and this does not, by the way, only apply to the public service workers. It also applies to those in the private sector, because they're also going to be deducted. We have, in principle, there are several issues that we do not agree with. Number one, anybody raiding a worker's payslip are supposed to go through a union. The reason as to why unions exist and why unions were formed was to entrench democracy at the workplace, to ensure that every worker feels that they are represented in decisions that are made to govern their workplace and themselves. So by the government just deciding to go ahead and raid our members' payslips without actually even coming to the table and telling us that this is what we want to do and this is how your members are going to benefit, that by itself we do not actually agree with, and it actually goes against the statutes that govern the labor relations. Number two, we feel that the government is not being sincere, and the government is shifting the burden of responsibility to the employee, what they're supposed to be doing themselves. If you look at NHIF, for example, there is an amended act of last year that also mandated an employer to pay a matching amount to NHIF.
Yep.
If you're paying 1,000, your employer is supposed to pay 1,000 shillings. So the government does not want to pay. So it wants to shift whatever they were supposed to pay to the employee. If you look at the regulations that are proposed, that have been proposed, that I think today is the deadline as to when we were supposed to give our inputs, then NHIF regulations, they have removed the obligation of the employer to pay a matching amount. So what they're simply telling you is that we don't want to pay as employers, so we want you to pay what we would have paid. And that is why they're increasing NHIF.
Explain that. This is about NHIF.
NHIF. In the amended act, it provides that the employer shall pay a matching amount.
Yes.
If you are deducted 1,500, your employer also pays for you 1,500.
Yes.
In the regulations that are now supposed to operationalize that act, whatever now they are going to use at the NHIF, they have conveniently omitted that part. And
for the employer contribution.
Yes, they have provided for what is the obligation of the employer and the NHIF, but that has been omitted so that they do not pay a matching amount. And that is why now they're increasing the employees so that now they can get the equal amount of funds they would have gotten without subjecting the employer to pay the same.
What have they increased?
They're increasing NHIF deductions to 2.75 of your gross salary, not your basic. So that means for anybody who was paying the maximum of 1,700, then you're going to be paying 2,700. And of course, we know the issues that we actually do have with NHIF. If you look at the Employment Act, the obligation to ensure that the employee is treated is actually for the employer. It is the employer who has been obligated to actually do that. Yet, now the employer only wants the employee to be the ones to finance their medical attention. We are not even complying with the law. When it comes to the housing fund, the housing fund, first of all, what does the law say? Article 43 of the Constitution is where they provide for accessible and adequate housing, not owned housing. Then in the Employment Act, it provides that every employer in their own expense, at their own expense, sorry, they shall provide housing convenient and close to the workplace to the employee. It is the obligation of the employer. Now you can see what the government is doing. And why I'm saying that we feel actually that the truthful men are not actually truthful is that while you are being deducted this, there are many other ways that you can actually do this without overburdening an employee, because the Kenyan employee today is overtaxed, overburdened. The cost of living has gone so high that we can barely afford to live a comfortable lifestyle for us and our families. And from June, we are increasing the fuel levy to 12. I think by another 8%, sorry.
VAT.
VAT. And that means that the cost of everything else is going to go high. The cost of living is going up. And then you are telling us, I still want to come and raid your pay slips. So why can't the government invite private entities to do private-public partnerships, build these houses? Then we can use probably our housing allowance. There are people who have a housing allowance, 40,000, 50,000. That is enough for you to get a mortgage, and you can be able to purchase that house once it's constructed without anybody having to raid your pay slip. So we feel that there is something we are not being told. This money is not for housing. This money is not for housing, because there are other ways and better ways to do this without actually having to overburden the employees. And that is why I'm saying probably the truthful men are not truthful. And in principle, the last thing is that where we are as employees, I think cumulatively, we are being taxed around 52%. And that is now that is including all these deductions. And don't tell me it's not a tax. Because if you tell me it's not a tax, but it's mandatory, and it's prescribed by the government, what are you telling me?
It's a saving.
But can you be compelled to save?
The government
they're helping you.
is being deliberate in its assistance of creating a savings culture in Kenya.
The government has licensed SACCOs, banks, and many other institutions. I can save my money in SACCOs. I do. Many people do. We go to insurance firms and we save for education for our kids. We can go to banks and open a savings account. We have so many options of saving. Why does the government want to compel us to one? What about the freedom of choice? Did they even ask us in the first place whether we are saving or not? How did they conclude that we are not saving? This is just a convenient narrative.
Peterson. The other guest we have in the studio is Edwin Dande, the CEO of Cytonn Investment. Good morning, Edwin.
Morning.
Good to have you as well here. You have also been talking about the housing fund and analyzing what has been proposed in the finance bill, what had been proposed previously. This is not new, though. It had been proposed before in the previous administration. Unions went to court and were challenging it, and those issues that were being challenged was primarily because there was insufficient and inadequate public participation. Now it's back.
Yeah.
With sufficient and adequate public participation. What is your view of the housing fund?
Thanks. I think it's good to, I sit where CT usually sits, and I think he always starts with a proverb.
Yes.
So I want to continue that and start with a quote. This is from a gentleman called Dande in June 2018. You've said this is nothing new. For sure, it's nothing new. The only thing that's new is that in 2018, it was 1.5%. That was a proposal. Now it's 3%, so it's double. So David D says, who thinks for this government? How do you convince a minimum wage earner in Kwale to finance middle-class housing in Nairobi? This is just a 9 billion a year slush fund for the government. Now, the only thing that has changed is no longer 9 billion a year. It is 18 billion a year.
Now David is on the other side of...
Now he's on the other side. So with that quote, we first have to start from the positive side. It is a good idea. Everybody wants housing. Who wouldn't want housing? Two, as my friend Wachira has just said, everybody wants to save. So who wouldn't want to save? So the president wants something good, which is housing. He wants to increase savings. The only question is how it is being done. The way it's being done, for me, is not even about the transparency issues. The math does not add up. Because when you talk about housing, the minimum house you can put in the market that I know about is 27 square meters. That is really a large hotel room. If you take 27 square meters, the cheapest you can actually build it is about 40,000 per square meter. So this house is 1.2 million. Now, if somebody is going to save for this house, let's take a median income earner, that is 50,000 shillings a month. 3% of that from themselves and from their employer, that is 3,000. They would have to save for over 30 years to be able to afford the cheapest house. So are we saying that people should start saving today and get the house in 30 years? I don't know. So those are the issues that they need to come and explain. Now, while the plan is not new, the initiative also is not new. We've been doing affordable housing. So my second issue is just accountability. It would have been good for the government to come and say, the houses we've done, for example, in Ngara, this is how much they cost, so it was efficient. And by the way, these are the people who got it. Because there's a question of, for the ones you've done, the 1,000, how much did they cost you? Are you anywhere close to the 40,000 per square meter? Are you efficient? And once you are done, how did you distribute it? Who got it? Is it really the hustlers that got it or not? So if the math is not adding up, if there is no accountability on what has been done so far, and then going back to what Wachira is saying, but the private sector can do this. We can do this. There's a question of then what is the role of government? Is it security, roads, or is it helping us to save and building for us houses? And are they good at that? So for me, those are the three key issues that I see. One, the math is not adding up. Two, we need more accountability. Three, the private sector can do it. And maybe the fourth one, which again is fundamental, if you look at government funds, so take like WESO Fund, Youth Enterprise Funds, the losses have been massive. If you take, I think it's the Youth Enterprise Fund, if you look at how much has been spent on running the fund, that's 4 billion. How much has been lost in non-performing loans? That's another 4 billion. So they're only left with 3 billion. 70% of it is lost. So as a Kenyan being asked to put money into a fund, I have to start by wondering, am I going to lose 70% of it up front so that the only chance is to get 3%? Will I ever get this house? So until those 5 key issues are addressed, I think it's a good idea, but the way we are going about it, it's not adding up.
I think one of the overriding math issues here is some of the stuff that you've brought up, Wachira, and that folks are asking one of two things. One, first of all, okay, call it whatever you want to call it savings, call it tax, but we have not been consulted about how you're going to go about and go ahead and do this. When you hear the uproar is now when you say, which we heard the president say yesterday, that look, folks, this is not a tax, it's saving, essentially you're going to get your money back. If you decide after the time that you want a house, you can get one. If you decide that you want your money back, you can get that as well. But I think here, the bullish way in which it's being presented is a problem. The second issue here is that folks don't have that much shilling left, or whatever they have today, it is not adequate to cover life. I mean, it sounds like a buzzword now, but the cost of living truly is through the roof. 1, 2, that things are getting more expensive by the day. In the next month or so, you're going to pay more for fuel. You pay more for fuel, everything else is going to become very expensive. Transport, food, everything is going to shoot through the roof. And I think those are the two things that Kenyans are finding burdensome today. To say that, okay, fine, it's great and it's forward thinking of a government, etc., but the people that you're asking to pay for this thing already are at the wall. And is that being taken into consideration, and how should it be?
Yeah, sure. And you see, the reason as to why we have what we call social dialogue is so that you can have a tripartite kind of consultation where the government, the employer, and the unions, the employees, through their representatives, they can sit and discuss matters pertaining to their welfare in terms of their workplace and the remuneration. If you look at the Employment Act also, it also provides that if you're going to deduct anything from an employee, they should have consented to, unless it's a tax. So if you're telling us it's not a tax, and you have not consulted us, then you're breaking the law.
Oh, okay.
The problem with our government is that impunity is the order of the day, and we know that it's only the citizens who are supposed to follow the law. The government does what is convenient. It doesn't usually consider the law. But then, as you have said, as the employees have already said, that we are overburdened, our pay slips cannot take any more deduction. And, part of this conversation would have been, we want you to own houses. And I wonder, what is the interest of the government, by the way, in people owning houses? Do you know there is no way the government benefits? In fact, the government benefits more when I'm renting than when I have my own house, because at least they'll have some tax on rental income. So how is the government going to benefit when I own my own house? But
So you just read for us Article 43.
Yes.
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 So we want to have that accessible, good housing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It has to be owned by somebody. Now that somebody can rent you the house.
Yeah, it can
But
be
housing is
rented.
not necessarily
It can
owning.
also be
Even
owned.
renting is housing.
Yes.
Yes.
And by the way, 67% of Kenyans, if you also look at rural areas, already own houses.
Yes.
You see, it would have been good to then say we want to get it to 100% or 90%. So again, it's just this thing has not been
Gentlemen.
explained pretty well.
Do we have a housing deficit in the country?
Huge.
Okay. So if we have a housing deficit, do you think the government has a responsibility towards ensuring that that deficit is bridged?
Absolutely.
Facilitative.
So this is it. So is the affordable housing idea a noble idea towards addressing this need?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a question of how it's being done.
So it's the how.
It is
It
the
is
how.
not the why we
I
did,
started
whether
by
we did
saying
housing.
whatever that the government is pushing is a positive initiative. The only question is how.
You see,
Yes, Wachira.
if you want us to own homes, what you should do is first to profile us and categorize us. Who is able to actually build their own home? Who is not able? Then those who are not able, what do we do about it? Why would you, for example, there are so many employees who have taken huge mortgages and loans. They have built their own houses.
Yep.
They are paying mortgages and loans.
Yes.
Now you are telling them they need to contribute for this affordable housing. For who?
For
I
the
already
others.
built mine. I'm carrying the burden of paying. Why should I contribute to this? So there was lack of consultation in this, and even the way it's being done, the forceful way. We are being told that you have to, and if you don't want to, especially ourselves now, we are being told that we are siding with the employers because we are refusing for the employees to be deducted so that they can get the houses. But by the way, he was doing the maths, and I think it's coming to around 420,000. That is at 5,000 per month for 7 years. Then after that, the CS in charge of housing is going to draft regulations to consider whether you're eligible or not. So you actually might not even be eligible.
After having paid the 3%.
After having paid the 3%. So after that 7 years, when you get that house, it's not that you're purchasing the house at 420,000. That only qualifies you now to get a mortgage, and now you can continue paying for that house.
Yeah.
So it's basically, you'll purchase the house in any other way that you would have. And that is why we're asking, why not go out and get these private entities to come and do PPP build the houses, and then once you have the houses, you can say, hey guys, I have some affordable houses here. Why don't you come and take a mortgage and buy it?
There's a lot of or lack of information, as you say, on what exactly this fund then does. Is the fund building homes? Is the fund being used to be the pool where the private contractors, because we can see all these houses that the president is launching, the housing schemes, there's a private contractor attached to it. Is it for the private contractors to use this pool to be able to access so they can then borrow money from the fund at a lower rate than the market and be able then to produce cheaper houses for the market? Those are the conversations. And I think when we come back from the break, I'll ask you, because previously when this matter was being fronted by the previous administration and the fund was floated, it was blocked in court by unions and by the Consumer Federation.
Yes.
And the unions withdrew the case from court. Why did the unions withdraw this case from court? Because once we understand why the unions did, then we can understand, are the unions then okay with this new fund? With a 1.5% or a 3% fund, with just the concept of the housing fund? Because if we don't do that, then we'll be lost. Let's take a break at 27 minutes to 8. As we take this break, yesterday the president was at Bellevue, where he was launching yet another of the affordable housing projects. And this is what he said about the housing fund. Listen.
The contribution you make in the housing fund is not a tax. Sio ushuru. Hiyo ni pesa yako. Hiyo ni pesa yako, sio pesa ya ushuru. Na hiyo pesa yako ukitoa shilingi moja, yule ambaye ni amekuajiri anatoa shilingi moja. Sio lazima uwe na mapato ya kiwango fulani. Tunataka hata yule mtu ambaye analipa rent shilingi 5,000 aweze kulipa mortgage hiyo 5,000. Baada ya miaka 10-15 ako na nyumba ambayo ni yake.
Already those on the Kenya Kwanza side have said this thing, we are passing it without changing a single thing. The president yesterday spoke about the housing fund and he said, we need it. Look at it as a way in which we are jump-starting people's journey towards home ownership and getting into better living. This is the journey that we are going into. And this is not the first time the president is talking about this. Earlier not this month, towards the end of April, he spoke at a church service in Embakasi, where he first raised this issue and said, this is what we want to do. And of course, there was a whole hue and cry about it from that. And the unions came out again and said, no, we don't support this. I interviewed the Principal Secretary for Housing, Charles Hinga, on KTN. And he came in to explain. Number one, first of all, at that point, he said, the idea then was it's not mandatory. The president was talking to civil servants and telling the civil servants, actually, we are putting together a kitty that those of our employees who would like to get into this housing fund, you come and apply, and as the employer, we are going to match that. It goes into the kitty. Now, of course, the finance bill says it now becomes mandatory. It's one of the statutory deductions. But the whole other idea of the fund and the reason why it had been blocked in court in the first instance was because of inadequate public participation. And the unions apparently withdrew because they said, all right, so we can have a conversation and now we go and do better public participation and structure this thing better. What I want to ask you, Peterson, is from your understanding, when the unions were withdrawing the cases before court, had they been convinced that this is a good thing and it's a thing that we need to now adopt as a country?
Thank you. And maybe before I answer that, let us just understand this housing levy and how you are supposed to benefit. You are deducted 3% of your basic pay. Your employer matches that. You pay for 7 years. If you are eligible, then you are allocated a house, you take a mortgage or a loan, and you purchase. If you are not, as will be determined by regulations to be drafted by the CS in charge of housing, I think there are 4 exits. One, you can transfer to your kin. The other one, you can transfer to your pension. Of course, the third one is if you're eligible and you're purchasing the houses. And the last one you can actually get your money in cash, but the interest goes to the government. Because they say that the money that you'll be given, and by the way, there is nowhere it says that you are going to be given with interest. But what they say is that you'll be charged, you'll be taxed as per the prevailing tax rates at that time. So that's why I'm saying you are giving government the money to use, and the tax, the interest will still go to them. So when it comes to in the previous regime, and as we also talk about the unions, we must also talk about the people in government. Because the people in government are on record actually opposing, for the same reasons we are opposing, and telling us to oppose because it was going to be burdensome to employees. But when it comes to the unions, it was taken, the case was taken to court by KUCO. I can't also tell you how it was withdrawn, because all we know is that KUCO, the SG sat with the president, and the case was withdrawn. And that is one of the problems we have, and we are also having today. Because, you see, the KUCO will go and have an agreement with the government, and they want all employees to follow that. But that is not how unions work. When you come to the structure of unions, each independent union is distinct, and it has its own processes. It has a national governing body. It has branches coming together, which is, we call it, like in our setting, an annual delegates conference, which is actually the decision-making body in terms of strategic policy for the union. So our expectation was that before KUCO probably goes to the president and negotiates, they should tell the unions, can you go to your members and make decisions? There is this proposal. Can you subject it to your decision-making process so that then we can take our collective decisions to KUCO, and KUCO can communicate to the government? And I think that is one of the problems that we are having. So now we are in a situation where the KUCO SG is in support, but all the employees in the public sector, all the unions representing, are against. And that is where we also found ourselves last year. And I think in the words of the current Prime Cabinet Secretary, when he was talking about the 1.5, by then it was half of what is being proposed, because he summarized it very well. And he said it was burdensome, the workers would be impoverished by that provision. Now, we have double that amount, and the same people who told us to reject the 1.5% are telling us, but look, 3% is better. So please take it. We are not being sincere. We are looking for money for other things. We know that this is not the only way we can be able to do this. There are better ways we can be able to do this. But because they want to raise money for some other reason, this is just a convenient narrative. That is what we believe. It may not be correct, but from the union's point of view, we believe that these are just convenient narratives. But what they are after is the workers' money. In fact, we should be increasing workers' money, not deducting.
Has there been any overtures from the government, from anybody, from the housing ministry, or from any sector, to reach out to the unions, to the employees, even in government, to explain this is what this fund is and this is how it shall work?
No, we have not seen.
Let's call that public participation. Has there been public participation on this bill, on this fund?
No, there has not been public participation. I think their target is in parliament, and we all know how our parliament looks like and how they are influenced and how they are mobilized towards one side. And that's why, as unions, we have decided that on 25th, as a matter of national interest, first we are going to have a procession as all the leaders of the unions to parliament, so that we can tell them that our members, who are the employees, not only of government, and who are their voters, have said they don't want to be deducted. And we'll be providing alternative solutions, because there are solutions readily available and that can be achieved.
Solutions to raising revenue, or solutions to getting houses?
To getting the houses, to getting enough money for NHIF, the solutions are there. When you talk about NHIF, just implement the amended act, make the employer pay a matching amount. You'll actually have more money than you're asking now. When it comes to the housing, float the PPPs. And by the way, I agree with you that actually most of them are PPPs.
Yep.
That's why we are wondering, the money that they're asking us to contribute, where is it going?
Where is it going?
So do they want Kenyans to loan private entities so that they can do business with government? That will be illegal. Are they facilitating private businesses to do business with our money?
Talking of the alternative, let me read for you. I think we are forgetting this. This is on State House Kenya Facebook, October 24th, 2022. Financial sector players have agreed to support the government's affordable housing plan and other major infrastructure projects, including industrial parks, with a 500 billion investment in the first year. So, you see, it looks like there is a possibility of doing this from the private sector. And again, to disclose in terms of conflict of interest, given that I'm in investment management, we think the private sector can do this. In a manner that makes sense to the housing agenda, in a manner that makes sense for the Kenyan public, by just contributing to a housing fund that is managed privately, just like a pension fund. So,
when the president was meeting with the private sector, sorry, do you want to come in? Just let me. When the president was meeting with the private sector in State House, it was mostly those in fund management, right?
yeah.
So we had insurance and pensions and all. And the conversation was, can they invest more heavily in the housing sector? Now, if you were to implement this housing fund, because you said the housing fund sounds like a good idea, how would those two sit? The private sector is willing to put in, is it 500 billion shillings? And then there's a housing fund that people are contributing into. How would you marry those two if you were to do it now in a better way?
You see, the same way you contribute to your money market fund, or the same way you contribute to education fund, private sector should start a private housing fund where you put your money voluntarily and the rate is known. You know, when you talk about savings, this is one savings that you don't know what you are getting. Because if you go to a bank and you buy a certificate of deposit, you will know this is what I'm getting. If you want to save in a money market fund, they'll tell you this is what I'm getting. If you want to save in an insurance plan, they'll tell you this is how much money you are getting. The housing plan as designed today, nobody knows what they are getting on their savings plan. And the same goes for the hustler fund, the piece that goes into savings. Up to today, we don't know what is the interest that these guys are getting, or I don't know if they are getting statements. So if it's a savings plan, it ought to have clear return profile. So we are saying the housing fund makes sense, but not in the public sector context. Let private players create housing funds. Let individuals put money, and they know this is my return. You put money for a certain period of time, you are getting 10 to 12% per annum return.
Yeah.
When the money is enough to put in a deposit, you transfer it from your housing, from your private housing savings plan, and put it into a deposit for a house, and then you continue paying what you are supposed to pay in rent. Now you pay to buy that particular house. So that's how it would work. Individuals will put money into a private savings plan the same way they do in pension,
and then they
buy a
contribute.
house.
But I don't hear you saying there's anything wrong with the public one as well. Same way we have the same for pension. We have a public one, and individuals can still buy their own pension scheme.
What is the
with the
return?
private sector?
What is the return? That's the
So
number
that's
one
the
question.
missing information.
That's one of the missing information. Then number two, what is the track record? The ones that have been done. You see, I'm starting by the ones have been done. Who got them? So there is a question of believability. Will it really go to the individuals that we are talking about? So if you can say this is the return for this housing fund, and I don't see why it should return anything less than 10%, because private sectors people are saying if you put money into a money market fund, we will give you 10%.
Yeah.
You will get your statement, and then you will go pick the house at the place you want, because there's also the issue of the guy in Mandera who you are going to deduct 3%. Will they come to Dandora or this affordable housing that we are launching. No, they want to live in Mandera. They want to live in Kwale. So there's the issue of choice. So it's just not return only. There are so many other issues with the plan as it is. And if I could just add one that Ndua talked about, you talk about whether people can afford. I want to bring a face to it. I talked to a lady who makes 16,000 shillings. They've lost 1,000. Lost, not that it's gone, but through the NSSF deduction. So somebody who was getting 16 now is getting 15.
Yeah.
Now, that is 6% that is gone from their income. You are telling them to reduce it again. And they're telling me, look, the money that is gone, this 1,000, this is 50 bob fare. So I cannot afford any more deduction at this particular point. So that's the other issue. Let people choose whether they want to put money. Let them organize their own affairs.
So essentially what we're saying is that this could be a scheme where people can actually benefit if they're given the benefit of choice, right? I would hope that even as you see the design of such ideas, that it is coming from a point of advice to say, this is how you can actually go about something like this. Looking at schemes that we've seen, whether they have been private in the past or otherwise, the way in which this is, because we're not really sure about the design of this idea. We're not sure that, as you're saying, Edwin, that if you put this in, this is what you're likely to get out. We're not sure how exactly this will all play out. All that's being said right now, really, without looking at schematics, is you take your 3%. And, maybe you'll have a house later or, after a few years or so. If you're not really interested in getting a house, perhaps you can get your money back. Essentially, that's what the saving is.
Yeah.
Does it look like the recipe for something that could go wrong? Does it look like something that could go wrong without the details of it? I mean, you mentioned the Hustler Fund, for example. You're saving, but you're not really sure where it goes. This 3% that you would get every month, where does it go? Will it go to an account somewhere, escrow, it's held? Will it actually be going into...
Will it be ring-fenced into housing?
Will it be buying doors, Will it be buying window frames? Literally. What happens to this money every month where it goes? Is it sitting somewhere waiting for it to accumulate and then it's thrown at one big project off Mombasa Road or in Kwale County? Really? Should we not know? So let's say that push comes to shove and totalitarianism kicks in and you have no choice but to remove this 3. Where is it going? How will it be set up? Do Kenyans not have the right to know all of these details? Or we will be told, actually, okay, guys, that went belly up. Sorry about it. Let's have another go at it.
And I think that's the principal grievance that people have. You're saying, I will take first and forcefully. I've just learned from him that if you're going to take forcefully, then it has to be a tax. So I'll tax you. But then your benefit is unknown. And the grievance, at least from the private sector, is that there's already an infrastructure to do this willingly. Why don't you support that infrastructure? Because if you're an individual today and you want to contribute into a housing fund, the real estate investment trust, the regulations actually say you have to have 5 million. So we've excluded the ordinary Kenyan. Then we turn around and say, but I will forcefully ask you to give me 5,000. So the government has a really good idea. The plan is not the right plan. And I don't know why, because the people who are running this, somebody like Peterson, a very brilliant guy, I know him from high school. So I don't know why we cannot sit and work on a market-based solution. We are an open market. We are a democracy. Why are we using this totalitarian kind of approach? Yet we do have the solutions that can work for markets voluntarily.
Another question is, this is being done probably out of convenience. We are making laws out of convenience so that we can get money for the government. What assurance do we have that after 7 years, we will not be told, hey guys, say we have not actually been able to achieve what we wanted. We think we actually want to extend it to another 7 years to 14 years. What stops the MPs from doing that? What stops the CS from, after 7 years, declaring everybody ineligible and selling their houses out because the government needs money? What stops them? So if you are going to take workers' money for something that is supposed to benefit them, the ideology should actually be coming from the workers. If it was something that is so convincing that it's supposed to benefit workers, we as the unionists would actually be the first ones, because our members would be pushing us that, look, this is a good thing, we want it. But how comes now our members are pushing us to actually do everything that we can so that it doesn't actually get implemented? Yes.
You're the chairman of the Clinical Officers Union. What's the lowest salary that a clinical officer gets in this country?
In public or in private?
In public. In the public
In
sector.
public, I would say the take home. The lowest probably maybe around 60.
That's net.
Yes.
So what's the basic?
The basic.
Yeah,
I
what's
think
the
the
basic
lowest
salary?
basic for now is around 20 something. Around 27 something.
So that's from what the 3%.
For clinical
This is
officers.
3% will come from that from the basic.
Yes.
It is 3% of the basic.
Yes.
Of that 27.
Yes.
All right. And that's what now you are raising issues and saying, when you take the 3% from that basic, then you've affected this person's take home.
But it's not only that. You have the 3 basic.
Right.
We are increasing the NHIF to 2.75 of gross, not basic. You also have NSSF for some.
Yeah.
For those counties that do not have a pension fund, they'll still be deducted the NSSF that we have increased.
But there's tier 1 for everybody. Whether they have pension or not, is it not?
Yeah, actually,
For
and that's something else that we have an issue with.
There's tier 1 and everybody will pay. And then there's tier 2, which will now...
Yes. And what we are saying is that when you have a pension, you're not supposed to be compelled to pay a second pension. That is also not legal. So if you look at these deductions cumulatively, they are burdensome. They're actually going to impoverish the civil servants. And I think the fact is, our economy runs on civil servants. And this is one secret that actually Kibaki used. When Excellency Kibaki, the former president, may God rest his soul in eternal peace, when he took up the government, our government was broke. And the first thing that he did, actually, when he came in, he actually implemented a pay rise for everyone, basically everyone, and then tax retro. So what that did is that with the extra money I'm having, I will invest. When I invest in a business, I employ more people, I pay them a salary, I pay tax. People will buy from my business, they pay VAT. And so he widened the tax net, and that is how Kenya was able to actually collect more tax. Now we are doing the reverse. You are taxing them more, we will not be able to invest, we will not employ anybody, and in future, if they continue like this, actually our taxes are going to come down. I think there's somebody who said that a nation cannot tax itself into prosperity. And if you try doing that, it's like getting into a bucket and you try lifting it by its handle. And that's what we are doing.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Edwin Dande, CEO of Cytonn Investments, and Peterson Wachira, the National Chairman of the Kenya Union of Clinical Officers.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.